Welcome to the Women of Ihsan podcast. I'm your host, Sophia, and this is an invitation to join me and our amazing guests to find inspiration and insights into your own journey to Ihsan. If you ever feel overwhelmed or confused along the way, I'm also here to support you so you can tackle your challenges with confidence and make progress towards this lofty goal. To find out more about my work, check the episode description and make sure to subscribe.
والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalat wassalam ala rasulillah. Welcome to a new episode of the Women of Ihsan podcast. Today we're doing a special episode again with Aysha Mercedes. Aysha was our guest on episode 21, and she's coming again to shed some light on her specialty, which is childhood trauma. So, as a reminder, Aysha Mercedes is a counselor and somatic therapist with a passion for helping women heal. With years of experience in trauma, anxiety, depression, and bereavement, she has guided many women towards resilience and strength. Inspired by her work and her own healing journey, Aysha has created a program for Muslim women that blends counseling and somatic techniques, nurturing mind, body, and soul. As a host and television presenter and public speaker, Aysha shares her story to inspire and empower others to heal and thrive. Aysha, I'm very excited to have you again. It's always lovely to see you. Assalamu alaikum again.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, dear sister Sophia. It's really, really lovely to come back again and to talk a little bit more in depth about my speciality, because I kind of find that a lot of the time I'm talking about my revert story, and whilst that's amazing, I love what I do, and I love supporting women and talking about this subject and bringing it into the Muslim community. But how are you anyway? How's it going?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well. When I see beautiful souls like yourself, I can only be super happy. Alhamdulillah, doing what I'm passionate about. Walillah alhamd. So, as you just mentioned, we want to talk about your specialty. So, can you first off talk about what is it that you do and why it's what makes this different from other therapies? Because there are so many sciences in psychology. So, what is it that you do exactly that that we can understand why we talk about this today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am a trauma counselor, and a lot of people get a bit confused and think, well, what is that? Because people have often confused what I do as coaching. Counseling, it's like the schools of thought in Islam. There's different schools of understanding in therapy, in counseling. So you have one that kind of more focuses on the past, one that focuses on the present, and one that focuses on the future. Some people may have heard of CBT, which focuses on the future. And the less commonly heard of ones are humanistic and psychodynamic. So I blend all three of these, but my main focus is to build a relationship with my client. That is my main focus. So first and foremost, I believe from my understanding and where I've studied, that the primary focus is on just building a relationship. And then what that does is it allows my client in the session with me to be themselves, to open up, and to feel comfortable, to feel comfortable to then express what it is they're going through. So that's the starting point. I then use various techniques from other modalities that you would class as more coaching techniques, more therapeutic techniques, to support and guide my clients to healing. So that's kind of what it is from the kind of more technical sense. But ultimately, I support my clients to deal with their past trauma. right? So when we're looking at past trauma, I've worked with a range of clients that have had a range of abuse, from sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence. But my primary focus on my program is to support those that have had emotional neglect. Now, emotional neglect isn't about what happened to you, like, you know, the typical, what we would say, abuse. It's about what didn't happen for you. So your relationship with your primary caregivers may have been abusive verbally, you know, emotionally, neglectfully, meaning that they weren't able to, maybe because of circumstances, maybe because of environment, financial circumstances. So the difference between so a lot of people look at childhood trauma and look at what you'd say PTSD as what's happened to you rather than what didn't happen for you. And a lot of people have been abused, but a lot of people didn't see themselves as going through trauma because it wasn't like they were abused, and they were always convinced that I had everything I needed, my parents were there. But the main reason why a lot of people are struggling today is because they weren't there emotionally. If you look at the development of a child's brain, the main thing that a child needs, yes, they need, you know, like if we look at the hierarchy of needs that Maslow's created, it's kind of the safety and the food and everything else. But the child's emotional needs need to be met as well, because it's almost like a form of starvation. If your emotional needs are not being met for whatever reason, then the child doesn't develop, the brain of the child doesn't develop correctly, which means when they go into adulthood, there's almost like parts missing. And then that's when you'll see the struggle with things like depression, anxiety, you know, confidence issues, self-worth issues, issues forming and building relationships, attachment issues. So my primary focus is to look at what has happened to you to then cause you to be in a really difficult place in the here and now. And that's when we focus on the relationship, but then we start to use somatic techniques to kind of parent your inner child, which I love doing with my clients. And then we look at, well, how is it affecting you now? So I might set you a mini challenge in order to, you know, go into a social setting, to set your boundaries, because boundaries is a massive one. If you've not had boundaries as a child, you've not had your parent to come in and, you know, and to help you enforce those, or to give you the confidence to know how to even do that, it's very likely in adulthood that you don't have those boundaries, or those boundaries are extremely weak. And it's the same with confidence and self-worth. If you've kind of just been left to get on with whatever you're getting on with, you've never really been praised, you've almost kind of not been seen, or you've been constantly put down or criticized, you grow up into an adult that doesn't believe in themselves, or on the flip side, does so much in their career, does so much in their business, does so much in their work or their, you know, their journey of motherhood, that they're burnt out all the time, because they're constantly trying to prove that they can do and they can do better and they are good enough. But it's your accolades don't constitute how good you feel about yourself inside and who you are. So there's so much to it. It's
really fascinating.
Yeah, there's so much depth to the impact of childhood trauma. And the reason why I work specifically on the emotional neglect and the relationship that you had with your parents is because when you look at the side of things that is abuse and that is, you know, sexual abuse, physical abuse, growing up in domestic violence, it's often prolonged and needs a lot of, you know, maybe years of therapy, right? There's often a lot of work that needs to be done. And I actually offer a 6-month program. So within that 6-month program, my guarantee is that I can help you to get from feeling stuck, feeling low, feeling lack of confidence, you know, socially pushed out, or not being able to make friends or form healthy relationships, to the complete opposite, to being confident, to being comfortable in who you are, to striving towards being your authentic self, to doing, stepping outside of your comfort zone. And that can be achieved in 6 months using, as I said, the somatic techniques. We start off with those. There's some Gestalt techniques that I use as well, which are really cool. And what they do is they open you up to have conversations without the other person being there. So for an example of that is the empty chair technique, right? So imagine you really wanted to say something to a teacher or your mum or your dad, but you know that actually you either can't have that conversation or the conversation won't go the way you want it to go. I don't even need this on, do I? Because I thought we were not even filming like that, are we? So I don't even know why I've even put all this stuff on. Sorry, excuse me. So with the empty chair technique, what will happen is if you want to have a conversation with somebody that you know isn't going to take it very well, cannot facilitate that space, or is no longer in your life, what that will do is it will give you a chance to actually, sounds quite silly, but actually sit and have a conversation with that chair as it is that person, and have an outlet, right? And that's just one of the techniques that can be used to actually air out your feelings and thoughts. And then one of the things that I do as well is look at your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a lot of the time when you've been traumatized, it affects the relationship that you have with Allah. So we are looking at building back that relationship. Now, everybody's in different phases and different stages in their connection. So what I don't do is I don't have a one size fits all with that particular part, because I believe that everybody is uniquely different. And even if somebody lived in the same household, right, and had the same parents, their experience would be extremely different.
Yeah.
So what I do is I look at, again, with the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what do you want to do? What ways do you want to move forward? And for some of my clients, it's just getting the salah, just focusing on your khushu', on your consciousness and connection in your salah. And with other clients is I want to connect back to the Quran. And it's easy to kind of, if you already are doing it, it's easy to kind of look at it like, well, why can't you just do that yourself? But when you're traumatized, you're stuck, everything feels so big, right? Even doing your salah, it feels huge. Reading the Quran, it feels huge.
Yeah.
Even things like learning, these things feel massive. They feel like a weight.
And that's why, I wanted to talk about this, because I know that there are a lot of people who feel like that, but they might feel intimidated or ashamed to, to put this out, like, because people, they are going to tell them, like, why don't you just do it, But it's more complicated than that. And that's why I just wanted to open up on this subject, because it is still something which is quite, taboo, and, mental health and everything that has to do with that. And I think the more we talk about it, the more the more people find it normal to go and seek the help they need. Because at the end of the day, it's what really matters, that you feel okay and you can have a good relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you are having, all of these dark thoughts, it's really not a good place to be in. And we can't just, brush this under the carpet and ignore that this is an existing problem. It is there. Like, a lot of people, men and women, they are suffering from that. So I really think, it's really important. The job that you do is really wonderful, and mashallah, the more we have Muslim professionals in this, as counselors and as therapists, the better, actually. Because I know a lot of the audience, they are also women in business, and I wanted to shed some light as well on why is it important to you know, like everything that has to do with self-development, you know, your personal growth, but also your mental state, your psychological state. Why is it important to take care of this and not just, you know, ignore it and, you know, just being in your business and doing and doing and doing until it's too late? And, you know, why do you recommend and why do you think it's important to take care of, you know, of what's happening inside of your mind and your emotions and everything?
Well, going back to the subject of trauma, a lot of entrepreneurs and women and men that are in business, their drive often comes from childhood trauma. If you look back to a lot of the entrepreneurs that we see and they tell their story, you know, let's look at Les Brown for an example, right? We know who Les Brown is, right?
No, I don't.
It's okay. So Les Brown, he's got a really fascinating story of being somebody that was at school and came from, you know, really poverty stricken background, and he couldn't speak properly. So he had a bit of a stutter. And so he was bullied and he was made fun of and all of this kind of thing. And he suffered like a lot of racism and saw it happening around him. And he then went on to become, you know, this great big public speaker. And this is somebody that could not speak, right? Somebody that could not speak or didn't have a voice because they were bullied and traumatized at home and, you know, at school. And what can happen is that the driver that comes from that is that, no, when I get older and when I get into adult life, I am going to push myself so far that I'm going to make sure that I'm so far removed from being that person that was bullied, that was traumatized, that was subject to abuse, that was neglected. But the problem with that sometimes that happens, and I've seen it happen a lot with entrepreneurs and people in business, is that along the way, it's almost like you've cut through doing the work. So you've gone straight from all of this happened to me, but I'm just going to grow and thrive and do all of this kind of great stuff in my business. But what about now looking after your mental health and well-being? And what happens, and what I've seen happen a lot again, is that you go and you go and you go. And if something happens, or if it becomes so overwhelming that you can't cope, then your childhood trauma and everything else starts to come to the surface. So now you're stuck, right? Now you're stuck. Now you're depressed. Now you're anxious. Now you're struggling to cope. And you've got to remember as well, a lot of people have children. So when you're disconnected from yourself because of this, and your focus is, I want to go and I want to do this entrepreneurial stuff and so on and so forth, or even if you are a mother and you are focused on, you know, just your kids and so on, you're neglecting yourself. And when you're neglecting yourself, what you will see is you will see it affecting everything else around your main focus. And then when something happens, you know, you have a bereavement, or, you know, you have a failure in your business, everything effectively comes crashing down. And now it's like you're kind of forced to look at yourself in the mirror and go and do that work. And this is extremely common. And a lot of people don't realize that burnout is mental health. And it can, and I've literally seen people that have had physical, because when your mental health stuff suffers, it can then become physical. And I've seen people that have actually had, or I know a particular client of mine that has had a stroke because they were so burnt out, because a lot of people don't recognize the signs to begin with, and they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And when you look back at their childhood, it's connected to not feeling good enough, not getting that right emotional support, you know, being emotionally neglected by primary caregivers. And I know it's a bitter pill to swallow, because none of us want to look back and blame and hold our parents responsible, right? But we have to make that connection so that we can go back and give our younger self what we need in order to work on the future. And when you skip that stage, it will come to bite you in the, for
Exactly.
lack of a better word.
It's going to catch up with you sooner or later.
Yeah. So, and I think that's probably one of the main things that I see with entrepreneurs. That's one of the main things, and the other one is where it feeds into the relationships that you build. So the divorce rate, as we know, in the Muslim community is not just in the Muslim community, but in the Muslim and the wider community, is extremely high. And the attachment styles that I love the kind of whole idea of the attachment styles and how you connect to your partner. When you look at the relationships that a lot of entrepreneurs have with their partners or their future husbands or in their relationships, it's almost like you see them very successful in business, very successful with friendships, and then you go and you look at their relationships and it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And why is that? Because if you have a mother wound or a father wound or both, meaning you have next to no emotional connection with your mother and father, you don't know how to connect to your partner. So you're either very clingy and very needy, or you're extremely avoidant and almost cut off. And it just depends on the circumstances that you grew up in. And then often you attract the opposite, but it's not in a good way. It's in quite an unhealthy, for lack of a better word, toxic relationship that forms, and now you're kind of either stuck or it results in divorce. So there's two key things that I see with entrepreneurs happening. It's the burnout and the, wanting to use your accolades to prove that you're good enough, to the point where you crash, and just not being very successful in marriage. And so it does require for you to take a step back and to start to work on yourself and say, look, well, this is great, I'm doing really well here, but I need to also work on my inner self first as well, so that I can look after myself.
Aysha, it's really like all of this is really fascinating, and I think we could do, on each topic we could do a podcast episode, just to try to talk about this more. But what I've been thinking is there some kind of prevention, or like, is it like, can you kind of avoid going into burnout? Like, what is your advice? Because you don't have to wait for something really serious to happen, like a big burnout or like depression to happen for you to go and see someone, because now everybody, like your own body is not following anymore, or even your family is going to tell you, okay, you have no other choice now and you have to go and see someone. So because as you know, Islam is also a religion of prevention. We try to avoid like falling into this hole, because it's so difficult to come out of it. What kind of preventive steps would you advise to follow? So, for anyone who's listening, maybe if they see some kind of, what are the signs or symptoms that they can identify and think, okay, maybe I fall into this category, and before it's too late, I might as well, ask a counselor like yourself, or go and seek therapy or whatever it may be.
I think the first one is take time off. This is one of the most underrated, most obvious in some respects thing that most people don't do. They don't take any time off. They don't have any time to themselves. Now, I appreciate that for some women it is difficult. Like, I appreciate that they have children and they're trying to build a business and they're at work and they're looking after the husband and the family and so on and so forth. However, you have to find a way to make time for yourself, because I always use this analogy of the empty cup. You cannot pour from an empty cup.
Yeah.
if you are pouring out for your family, pouring out for your, you know, in-laws, pouring out for your work, pouring out for your everything that you have to do, as you know, around the house and with your husband and kids, then you're going to be left on empty.
Yep.
And you know, when you drive a car and there's no petrol, eventually the car just stops moving. So the first thing is that, as much as you may feel like, I've been in an experience before where I've been burnt out, and you know, I started to feel pins and needles on the top of my head, and you know, you'll feel really tired and really overwhelmed and really snappy and irritable. These are signs that you're already burnt out, especially, you know, if it's not your character. It's stress is when you feel like you're just overburdened, you're overwhelmed, you're just tired, fed up, annoyed. So when you're not giving yourself any time off, you're driving the car on red, you've got, you know, the whole family in the car as well. They need drinks and snacks, and they're asking, how are we there yet, and everything else. Then all of a sudden you start screaming and shouting because you're overwhelmed. So before it gets to that, even though a lot of people feel mum guilt and just guilt in general, or you know, oh, if I stop, then I'm not going to be able to get through and make this, you know, this money, and I need to, and so on and so forth. There is in, I can't remember where it is, but there's a it's not even, it is an analogy, right? It's there's a farmer that is trying to cut down a tree, and he has an axe that is like, it's like it needs sharpening basically. But in his mind, he's trying to cut down this tree, and he's like, if I stop to sharpen this tree, sharpen this axe, it's going to take more time. So he carries on and on and on and on, thinking that if he stops to sharpen it, because it might take an hour to get the blade really sharp, he's thinking, no, if I stop to sharpen it, I'm going to lose out on time. But actually, when he does stop to sharpen it, even though he loses out on that hour, he gains the sharpness of the axe, and he actually is more successful in cutting down the tree. So where we try to use logic in thinking that if I take time off, I'm going to lose out, you actually gain. Because when you take breaks, when you take time off, when you pour into yourself, self-care and all that great stuff, you actually come back stronger and better, so you can get more done. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that. I used to work 6 or 7 days a week. I now only work 4 days, maximum 5. And I enjoy and I thrive on my time off. And I see everybody around me, you know, working really hard and doing things. And that's great. But you've only got one mind, and you've only got one body. And it's an amana from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So whilst some people may think they're getting ahead, you have to realize what impact that, you know, working like that, especially as a woman. Remember, we're the bent rib, right? So we're not actually supposed to be working like
Exactly.
that. We look at sort of feminine energy and all that kind of stuff. We are supposed to be moving slowly and gracefully, and we're supposed to have, you know, time and just, you know, move in a gentle kind of way.
Yeah.
And we can still be entrepreneurs, and we can still work hard, and we can still
I feel like, you know, it's also modern society that has pushed us, like Muslim and non-Muslim, to behave like robots, like machines. Like, you never stop, like this toxic productivity that we've been fed with for so many years. Like, and like you said, like to the point that we feel guilty if we're not like if we are not actually hustling. And it's completely like, it has nothing to do with our own deen and what's the nature of women, and even for men. Like, even men are not robots that should be working every waking hour. Like, but as women is even more true, that we should take time for ourselves and just, you know, like I said previously, as human beings, let's just be, like, just be. present and not just do. Like we are human beings, just to be, and being in the presence of ourselves, being in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not always having our minds racing towards, okay, what's the next thing I can do? What's the next thing I can achieve? What's the like the next tangible things that I can hold in my hands, and or the next zeros I can see on my bank account, you know,
Yeah.
or the next thing I can buy with the money, or
And get
subhanallah, it's just there are so many factors to explain why we are in the situation we are in today.
I was going to say as well, so the second thing that I would say as well, leading off the back of what you said, because it's a really good point. It's like we feel like we have to be productive and constant and, you know, looking at numbers and everything else. But the second thing, and this is something that my business mentor, Khadija Safari, taught me, and something that I found so amazing, it's outsourcing some of the workload. Like, I cannot tell you how important it is, and that looks very different for different people. So if you're an entrepreneur, and like, for example, I cannot tell you how much I despise having to engage, having to respond to me. I just don't like doing it. And you know, and anybody that knows me knows I'm really crap with responding to messages. You probably even know that. I don't ignore people. I just don't. It's just something that it takes a lot of energy from me, right? I'm very old school. I like to meet up with people. I'm very much a social person in present, but when this kind of constant, like I was saying, if, for example, you don't like responding to messages, you don't particularly like having to contact people and all of that kind of thing, but you're running a business, it's a necessary requirement of running that business, right? So find somebody that can do that part for you. Some people love doing that. We had this conversation last night on our business mentorship coaching call. It's some people really enjoy the engagement and love being on social media and love talking to people and all of that. So you wouldn't necessarily need to outsource that. Some people hate being in front of the camera. For me, creating content, being in front of the camera is not a big deal. I don't find it stressful. Yes, would I like to eventually have somebody to take over? Yes, of course. But it isn't as heavy for me as it is for some people. So I would say find the things that you struggle with and the things that make you feel overwhelmed, and find somebody. There's lots of people around the world that, you know, even it's just an hour a day or a couple of hours a week, that you can pay a small amount of money to manage those things for you. And that even goes for if you're at home and you're a mother and you're a wife and you're working. If you need to get a cleaner, a lot of my friends that are mothers and that have homes and they're working, they have a cleaner come in a couple of times a week. Why? Because they just don't have the time. And that couple of hours that they're spending, that the cleaner's spending cleaning their homes, they get to spend with their children. And it alleviates that overbearing stress that they have on them. So I definitely say, like, to avoid burnout, you have to invest, because that's a form of self-care. You're investing in alleviating some of your tasks by paying somebody to do them for you.
Again, I feel like it's one of those toxic misconceptions we have been growing up with and fed by society, that if you're asking for help for anything, then you're weak, like you're not good enough. Why can't you do everything? Like, and subhanallah, we are doing so, like we are in a stage in human history where women are doing so much. Like, we used to have a village to raise the children. Now, society, like especially Western societies, have become more individualistic, so that each on his own, we have to take care of everything. So the mom, she has to work, she has to raise her kids, she has to clean her house, like so many things that we need to do. She has to run around like a headless chicken to go pick up the kids and get them to their activities. she has to cook, she has
Yeah.
to be to look nice for her husband, like there's just everything, and expect her to just be on top of everything, like a machine basically.
Mhm.
And if she asks for help, okay, for cleaning or whatever, like help with the kids, then oh my God, something's wrong with her. Like she can't deal with everything. When it was never the case that a woman on her own would take care of all of this and work on top of that to go and earn money. It was never the case before, like the last, I don't know, maybe 50, 60 years, I don't know.
Absolutely. I was reading a book called What Happened to You. It's by Oprah Winfrey and a doctor. He's a psychiatrist. And the book talks about trauma and, the effects of trauma. And a lot of the conclusions of the research is that people are suffering now. Yes, childhood trauma has an impact, but how people are able to heal now is by socialization and having support. And there was this case that happened where there was, I think it was in America, there was a gunman that came and they tried to rob a bank. And in robbing the bank, they held hostages and they ended up killing all of the adult hostages. So the children were left over. And then, because obviously it was so traumatic for the children, they put the children in a home, and they had all of these different like psychiatrists and like social services and like therapists and all these professionals going to them. And what they noticed is that they let the children play because they were still quite young, and they would go to them, and the children would go to different people for different reasons. And their conclusion was that in order for them to heal and thrive after they'd gone through these traumatic experiences was to have, at least 5 sources of support. Do you see what I mean? So
Yeah.
that's just a singular child or a singular person. So imagine having that kind of generational trauma from your past, then trying to raise your children, and you're doing it by yourself.
Yeah.
Even if you've healed and you've had all of this, that specific therapy and things like that, it's very different to having the support system. And what he was saying is that each individual person needs at least 5 sources of support to thrive. So you imagine now being a mother and being isolated somewhere, in a particular area of the country, moved away with husband or moved out of the country or and then doesn't have a community, doesn't have their parents around, doesn't have might not be able to afford to have a therapist, doesn't have a nanny or a cleaner and all of these things. This makes a massive difference because she is now carrying the burden of a child.
Exactly.
And her own, more likely burden of her own trauma. And even if she's not traumatized, it's still a lot to kind of deal with. But where we are in, particularly in the UK, you just can't afford it. And everybody's so far away from each other that you often only see people every so often. And the client that I have has the same issue. They are isolated. They struggle to meet friends. And social media has just emphasized that kind of feeling, in it we all feel like we're socializing because we're on social media, but we're actually extremely detached from one another and isolated in different parts of the country. And then people have these existential crises of just being very, very lonely. And it's really sad that we have got to this. And we know from the Quran and the Sunnah how important it is to have family ties and good companionships.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ says, having a companion is like the seller of musk. Like, you come away feeling refreshed. Imagine having that in a community, that that family set up and support. But that is not the reality. So we have to, and that's the third thing that I was saying is that you have to put yourself out there to find people that are like-minded, that can support you and you can support them. This is a necessary requirement in the day times we're living in. You can't just sit back and expect people to just pop up, or expect the local mosque to organize things. La, we are not in those times. We all have to be individually proactive. And this is what I support my clients to do. I'm like, go and find your people. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen. They're not going to come to you. You have to find them. You have to create. If you haven't got a community, create that community.
Yeah. Because subhanallah, I've said that before, but subhanallah, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they can be repeated on, and like it's never going to be like something that we don't need to hear. And Surah Al-Fatiha, which is the opening of the Quran, it is a prayer that we make in the plural. It is like, as a community, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us. It's not about, oh, I believe in you, Ya Allah, and guide me. No, it's we believe in you and please guide us together, because we need to be, like, we are not supposed to be on our own. And even there's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that says that we need to be careful not to be isolated, because a shaitan, he comes to the people who is alone, like the lone sheep. He will come to it, or to them rather. So it is like we were never supposed and expected to be on our own to do everything. It's not true. Like, and it's fine to need help. Like, it's normal to complement each other. And I really hope that one of the main takeaway that, especially the women who are listening to the podcast can, take with them is, it's okay if I can't do everything on my own. Like, it's okay if I need help. It's okay if I need to take some time off. It's okay if I feel like I could use some therapy.
Yeah. And I think as well, just to quickly lead on from that, like, there is a such thing as spiritual burnout as well. So whilst we're looking at like emotional burnout and, physical burnout and mental burnout, there's also a spiritual burnout as well. And that also comes about when we're not spiritually connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are not in our sort of gratitude and mindful state of mind. Because when you're in your head all of the time, and this is the last thing that I would say about kind of the burnout element as well, because we've kind of covered the physical and the mental and the emotional, right? But yeah, you can use a therapist, but these are things that you can use outside of that, and that you can try, we're talking about preventative measures. It is, you have to, again, nothing ever comes by you just sitting down and expecting it to come because you've thought of it. Allah even tells us, with tawakkul, that you put your trust in Allah. Sorry, Allah even tells us with tawakkul that you put your trust in Allah, and then you tie your camel, then you start to make moves. So when it comes to building the relationship with Allah, it's putting your trust in Him, understanding who He is and having good thoughts about Him. But now you've got to start to make moves, and when you're disconnected from Allah, and when you haven't got the verses of the Quran reminding you and going round in your head, you have to do something about that, right? And I start off with the gratitude. That's always something I think about. It's not a big thing. It's not reading 20 pages of the Quran every day, or reciting the Quran all day every day, or because I'm not great with that. I'll be honest, I'm not an amazing person when it comes to the Quran. I do read the Quran, but I don't read it as often as I should. I am currently doing Islamic studies, alhamdulillah, and that really does, and it's just a short, and it's really, for me, again, Prophet ﷺ says what? Small and consistent deeds.
Exactly, yeah.
So I just do, Wednesday I have a couple of hours, Saturday I have a couple of hours, right? Again, it's looking at, what am I good at? What can I be consistent in, right? Even if I can't be consistent in sunnah prayers or daily Quran reading or memorizing the Quran, we're not all good at the same thing. If we looked back at the Sahabas, some of them were great in, certain things. Other of them were great in other things. Some were great fighters. Some were great at charity. So we have to look at what we're good at. I've got a friend of mine she is very busy with work. She always gives a lot of sadaqah because she's getting her rizq and she wants to purify her wealth. You have to figure out what it is that not only you're good at when it comes to the deen and the Quran and the Sunnah, but also what fills your heart with joy. And like I said, for me, the gratitude, just which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? Just even contemplating over that one ayah, it makes a massive difference to your day. And even if you can just find that one ayah and you just keep thinking about that, or just dhikr, simple things that don't require a lot of time if you don't have the time, but will have a profound effect on the heart. So we were looking at the 4 preventative methods to burnout. So the first one is taking time off.
Yes, time off. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Taking time off. The second one is outsourcing, right? Don't do it all by yourself. Let other people help you and support you. The second one is find your tribe. The third
one. We're going to make it. Okay.
Yeah.
We can count 2 to 4.
Yeah. So find your tribe, find your community, find your people.
Yeah.
Don't be isolated. And the fourth one is find your way of connecting with Allah. Do small and consistent deeds.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ponder on something small. Just keep it minimal but consistent. Those are the 4 things that
I'm so focused in everything that you say. I didn't see that you had something coming here, like, number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4.
Yeah. I usually honestly just make things up on the spot. But I should actually start writing these down because they are actually they really are quite helpful tips and things that I do myself as well. So I don't ever like to tell people to do things
that you don't do. Yeah. Definitely. It's just better to speak. It's just real talk here. We're not speaking of something we don't know.
Yeah.
Amazing. I see we have come at the end of our hour together, Aysha.
Mm-hmm.
I want to have you back, but when, I don't know. Inshallah, you're always welcome on the show, and thank you so much. I'll leave you, some concluding words for the audience before we stop.
I just think my concluding words are just look after yourself, because there's only one of you, and our minds and our bodies are an amana. So we have to look after ourselves, and only you know what that looks like for you.
And only you can do that for you.
Yeah. It has to be like, self-care isn't selfish. You putting yourself first at times isn't selfish, and I think that's what it is. Just look after yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really important. It sounds so simple, but like and I know, because we know many women and we know ourselves too, because we talk from experience. It's not that obvious that we should take care of ourselves first and put ourselves first. Usually it's more, okay, everybody else, and then I come.
Mm-hmm.
If anything is left from my energy, from my time and everything.
From your energy.
So it is super important. And thank you so much, Aysha, again, for your time. And thank you for listening to the audience. Please show us your support. If you like the episode, please let us know, leave a comment, like and share, tag us on Instagram. And if you want us to do another special episode on a particular topic, then let us know, and we will oblige, inshallah. So thanks again, Aysha, and salam alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallahu khairan. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, sis.